I nearly choked on my coffee when I pulled into my driveway that Saturday afternoon. A staggering lineup of 57 unfamiliar cars sprawled across my property. There were sedans balanced on my rose bushes, SUVs half blocking the porch steps, and even a flashy convertible idling right over the flower beds my late mother had planted. My family's homestead sits in the outskirts of Glendale, a quaint Virginia town known for wide yards and calm neighbors. But this site was anything but calm. I slammed my car door shut, staring in disbelief. At first, I thought maybe there was a funeral or a charity event next door and some lazy guests decided my yard was fair game. Then I spotted a huge balloon archway rising from behind my fence, where a line of people in party hats wandered back and forth with red plastic cups. A scraggly sign taped to my mailbox read, HOA official event, parking this way. I've dealt with the Glendale Crest Homeowners Association for years, but never had they stooped to commandeering private property for their events. Before I even stepped out to investigate, an older man in an ill-fitting polo approached me, apparently volunteering as a makeshift valet. "Sir, please move your vehicle so guests can park," he said. The gall of him. "My name is Thomas Watts. I own this land outright. I'm an auctioneer by trade, traveling across the state to run estate sales, farm auctions, you name it. But folks in Glendale only know me as that quiet neighbor with the big yard. They certainly have no idea how formidable I can be in a legal showdown." "Are you kidding me?" I barked, pointing to the cluster of cars. "This is my property. Who gave you permission to park here?" The man blinked as though I'd asked him something outrageous. "The HOA said they had an arrangement. This is for Ms. Henderson's birthday bash. The entire community was invited." I'd heard of Miss Henderson, a formidable woman in her 50s, president of Glendale Crest HOA. She was known for issuing petty fines over mailbox decorations, or for grass being half an inch too tall. But to let 57 party-goers park on my land without asking? That was new. I marched toward the fence, shoving aside a helium balloon that threatened to block my path. My neat lawn was littered with footprints, scuffs, and snack wrappers. Music blared from behind the fence, accompanied by rowdy laughter. And yes, there she was, Deborah Henderson, the HOA queen bee, wearing a bright pink blouse and oversized sunglasses, sipping from a plastic cup while directing traffic. She spotted me and ambled over, wearing a smug grin. "Oh, Thomas, you're finally home," she drawled. "I know it looks a bit chaotic, but trust me, it's all in good fun. We have a large turnout, so I arranged a temporary solution. We needed extra parking, and your yard was the only convenient space." My jaw tightened. "And you didn't think to call me? Or text me? Or how about this? Ask for permission?" I demanded. She waved a dismissive hand, as if I were a child whining about spilled ice cream. "There wasn't time. Plus, I assumed you'd cooperate for the sake of the community." I took a deep breath. 1,000 retorts swirled in my mind, but I forced myself to remain calm, for the moment. "Miss Henderson, this is private property. You have zero authority to turn it into a parking lot. I want these cars gone immediately." Her smile faltered. "That's not feasible right now. The party's in full swing. Moving all these vehicles would cause chaos. Let's discuss this after the event, okay?" She turned on her heel and strode away, leaving me fuming. I watched as more guests trickled in, guided by clueless volunteers who waved them onto the lawn as though it were public domain. I recognized a few Glendale Crest residents among them, people who'd always been cordial neighbors. Now they either avoided eye contact or shrugged apologetically, clearly under Miss Henderson's thrall. I retreated into my house, slamming the door. My heart pounded and a headache threatened to form behind my eyes. This might seem like a trivial dispute, just a row of cars, but for me, it was a matter of principle. My father worked this land for decades as a small-scale orchard farmer, leaving it to me when he passed. I kept it well-maintained out of respect for him. For Ms. Henderson and her HOA to waltz in and treat it like free real estate was an insult I couldn't ignore. After pacing my living room for half an hour, I made a decision. I'd always had a cunning streak, especially in my line of work. As an auctioneer, I know the property laws regarding abandoned items, liens, and repossessions better than most. People forget that in Virginia, if you park a vehicle on private property without permission, especially if posted no trespassing signs are ignored, a property owner can tow or remove the vehicles at the owner's expense, and if left long enough, those vehicles could be considered abandoned. But I had something more dramatic in mind, something that would send a clear message to Miss Henderson. I rummaged through my home office for the yard signs that read, "No unauthorized parking, violators will be towed." I'd always meant to put them up, but Glendale Crest was typically quiet, so it never felt urgent. Well, that changed today. I placed one sign near the mailbox and another at the edge of the yard in plain view. Then I dialed a local tow company and explained the situation. They said they were swamped but could show up in a couple of hours. Meanwhile, a sly idea took root in my brain. What if I leveraged my profession as an auctioneer to handle these cars? I'd read about legal precedents where, under certain conditions, a property owner could claim a mechanic's lien for illegally parked vehicles, requiring the owners to pay fees before retrieving them. If the owners fail to pay, the vehicles can be auctioned. But that's only legal if the property owner follows certain steps, like notifying authorities and letting the owners know. However, Ms. Henderson had always bragged about how Glendale Crest had friends in high places, so maybe the official route would get complicated. Then again, if I orchestrated a scenario that forced them to either abide by the law or face immediate consequences, it could work. The more I thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. I typed out a sign in bold letters, something that would stand out. Notice: unauthorized vehicles may be seized and auctioned for trespassing. Sure, it was provocative, and I'd have to confirm the legal intricacies, but I'd dealt with property disputes before. Let them call the police if they wanted. I was confident enough to defend my stance. Outside, the party raged on for hours. Loud music, laughter, and the aroma of grilled burgers drifted across my fence. People strolled back and forth to their cars, unloading gifts or picking up more drinks. No one came to talk to me or ask permission. By 7 p.m., I'd had enough. The tow trucks arrived, two massive rigs ready to haul vehicles away. The drivers were friends of mine, ironically clients from a past farm equipment auction. They grinned at my predicament. We started with a few cars parked precariously close to my porch. As the tow drivers hooked them up, an outcry erupted from the yard next door. A handful of guests rushed over, yelling, "Hey, hey! That's my car!" Meanwhile, Miss Henderson stormed toward me, looking livid. "Thomas, you can't do this. This is illegal," she screeched. "Is it?" I shot back, pointing at the newly placed "No unauthorized parking" signs. "It's also illegal to park 57 cars on private property without permission. This is me cleaning up your mess." She huffed and threatened to call the police. I shrugged. "Do it. I'll explain how your guests trespassed. Maybe the police will find you too." Her face reddened, but she backed down momentarily. Some guests began moving their cars, albeit grudgingly. Others argued, claiming they had HOA approval. But that approval meant nothing on my land. The tow trucks carted off 4 vehicles before the commotion died down. Miss Henderson hissed, "You'll regret this, Thomas. The HOA won't tolerate your stunt." Then she stomped away, presumably to salvage her party. All the while my mind churned over an even bolder step, organizing a quick private auction right here, tonight, if the owners refused to move. But it wasn't just a matter of whim. I had to follow certain procedural steps. The local towing laws required owners to pay towing fees or risk their cars being impounded. Typically, an official impound yard is used, but as a property owner with an auctioneer license, I had an unusual advantage. I could store vehicles on site for a short period. By 9 p.m., many guests had left in anger or frustration. A handful of truly clueless partiers ignored the fiasco, continuing their revelry. The tension around the fence line simmered, with Ms. Henderson's scowling face occasionally peering my way. Then, around 10 p.m., the party started winding down. People realized their cars were threatened, so they scrambled to drive away. Yet an astounding 15 vehicles remained, either because their owners were drunk or they'd gone off in someone else's car, intending to pick them up in the morning. Ms. Henderson herself vanished, leaving behind a few hapless volunteers who had no clue how to handle the situation. When midnight rolled around, I enacted the next phase of my plan. The tow drivers returned, hooking up half a dozen cars to bring to my secure lot behind the barn, an area I sometimes used to store large auction items. Each owner would be charged a storage fee for every day their car remained. If they refused to pay, well, I could file the paperwork to auction the vehicles after a statutory waiting period. I hammered a final sign onto a wooden stake. Trespassing vehicles, storage fees, $50 per day, auction, if unclaimed. Some might consider that extreme, but I considered it justice. The next morning I was awakened by relentless pounding on my door. I swung it open to find Ms. Henderson, looking disheveled and furious, accompanied by two men in polo shirts. "Where are their cars?" she demanded, pointing to the men. One fellow had streaks of face paint from the previous night's festivities. The other man's shirt read, "Birthday Crew." They glared at me as though I were the villain in this scenario. "In my storage lot," I replied calmly. "They can retrieve them after paying the towing and storage fees, which currently sit at $150 per vehicle, $100 for the tow, $50 for overnight storage. The fee goes up $50 every additional day." The men exploded in protest. One threatened legal action, the other spat curses. Miss Henderson tried to override me with some nonsense about HOA regulations. I walked them to the side yard, pointing to the posted signs. "These have been up since before your party ended," I said. "If you can show me a legal document giving the HOA the right to commandeer my land, I'll waive the fees. Otherwise, I suggest you pay the bill and drive your cars out." She attempted to dial the local police, but I preempted her. "Excellent," I said. "Let's talk to the police. They can confirm my right to remove trespassing vehicles from my property." They all paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Ms. Henderson hung up, muttering something about the stress of the situation. Eventually, the men begrudgingly followed me to the storage lot. 5 other car owners had already arrived, milling around in various states of frustration. Each paid the fees, some in cash, others by card or check, just so they could drive away. One woman sobbed, complaining she couldn't afford $150. I felt a twinge of pity. I reduced her fee to $75 after confirming she was a single mother who left early and had no idea the parking arrangement was unauthorized. That leniency, however, was not extended to Ms. Henderson's cronies. In the midst of the chaos, Ms. Henderson hovered, phone in hand, likely calling every official in Glendale. She threatened me with the wrath of the HOA board, but she got nowhere. By noon, most vehicles had been claimed, leaving 4 behind. Their owners were unaccounted for. I set a 1-week deadline. If they didn't settle, I'd proceed to auction. Miss Henderson ranted that the owners were out of state or that they'd gone on extended vacations. Not my problem. She glared at me with genuine hatred. By Monday, Glendale Crest's gossip mill was in full swing. Some neighbors quietly praised me for standing up to the HOA, which had grown increasingly autocratic. Others criticized me for being heartless, but I had little patience for that. The HOA's arrogance had triggered this fiasco, and I wasn't about to roll over. That evening, Miss Henderson decided to hold an emergency HOA meeting, presumably to address the parking crisis. She sent me a text. "Your attendance is required at the Glendale Crest Board meeting tonight at 7 p.m. The nerve of this woman, to bark orders at me. I decided to go anyway, if only to see her squirm. The meeting took place in the Glendale Crest Clubhouse, an upscale venue with polished floors and a high ceiling. Usually, board meetings drew a handful of residents, but tonight the room was packed. News of the towing and car ransom had spread like wildfire. I entered to a chorus of murmurs and curious stares. Miss Henderson perched behind a long table with 4 other board members, looking every inch the disgruntled monarch. She began with a shrill call to order, rattling off some minor agenda items, trash pickup schedules, a new tennis court net, that sort of nonsense. After a few minutes, she cleared her throat and announced, Now, the main issue at hand, the unethical impounding of Glendale Crest residents' vehicles by Mr. Thomas Watts. A spotlight metaphorically turned on me. I stood up, arms folded. Unethical? I repeated. What about the unethical act of using my land as your personal parking lot? Ms. Henderson's eyes blazed. That land is adjacent to Glendale Crest property, and we have an implied easement. I cut her off. Implied easement? That's laughable. Show me the deed. I've owned that property for 20 years, and not once have I granted any easement to Glendale Crest. My father's orchard land was never part of your HOA. She glanced at the board members for support. A younger member, presumably new, hesitated. We, didn't see any official easement documents, he murmured. Another board member in a crisp suit jumped in. But we believed that spot was unused, so for the big party, Ms. Henderson stated it was acceptable to park there. That was a blatant lie, I said, trying to maintain composure. She never asked, never negotiated, never offered compensation. She just declared my property open to the public. I scanned the faces in the room, seeing a few sympathetic nods. Miss Henderson tried a different tack. Fine, maybe we were misinformed, but your reaction was extreme. Towing cars, charging exorbitant fees, that's predatory behavior. I pulled out copies of local towing statutes. Legally, the property owner can remove any unauthorized vehicles at the owner's expense. If you have a problem, file a complaint with the city. I'm sure they'll see that the HOA orchestrated the trespass in the first place. A wave of uneasy chatter spread through the audience. A tall man with a stern expression rose. I'm a longtime resident, and I'd like to say the HOA has overreached too often. I got fined for having my trash can out an hour early. Now they're using private land for their parties? Enough is enough. Sporadic applause broke out. Miss Henderson's composure cracked slightly. She glared daggers at the man. Sensing momentum, I pressed on. You call me unethical, but I gave every car owner a chance to pay a modest fee and retrieve their vehicle. If Ms. Henderson had come to me politely in the first place, we might have worked out a different arrangement. Instead, she acted like a dictator, volunteering what wasn't hers to volunteer. An older woman in a floral dress piped up from the back. Where is the HOA accountability? My nephew's car got towed, and I blame Miss Henderson for not telling him the truth. He thought it was official. More agreement ensued. Miss Henderson tried to restore order by tapping her gavel, but the crowd's murmurs grew. The board members looked uncomfortable, each glancing at the other for support. Ultimately, Miss Henderson had no choice but to table the discussion, saying the HOA's legal counsel would be consulted. She ended the meeting abruptly, ignoring the outcry from residents. As people filed out, some gave me encouraging nods. Others just looked weary, as though they'd seen the HOA's bullying for too long. The next day, Ms. Henderson's legal counsel turned out to be a local attorney named Grace Walters. She sent me a stiffly worded letter, accusing me of inappropriate seizure of property and threatening to sue if I didn't release the remaining vehicles without fees. I recognized Walter's name. She'd bungled a small estate settlement at an auction I handled a year ago. She was competent but no bulldog. I felt confident I could defend my position. I crafted a response citing the trespassing laws, the posted signs, and my good faith efforts to let owners reclaim their cars. I also mentioned that Miss Henderson's negligence in organizing the party was the root cause of any damages. If they wanted to go to court, I'd happily see them there. Days passed. Tensions rose in Glendale Crest as the story spread. A local reporter from the Glendale Gazette reached out wanting an interview. I agreed, explaining my side. The HOA had repeatedly overstepped, culminating in this fiasco. The article portrayed Miss Henderson as high-handed, stirring further discontent among residents. Some demanded her resignation or at least a formal apology. She refused, doubling down on the notion that I was exploiting a minor parking issue. Meanwhile, 2 of the 4 unclaimed vehicles were collected by their owners, each paying me the accrued storage fees. The remaining 2 were apparently registered to individuals who hadn't shown up. According to Ms. Henderson, they were friends of a friend. After the legally required notice period, I prepared to do the unthinkable. Hold a public auction for these abandoned cars. I published a small legal ad in the Gazette. Auction of trespassing vehicles. To be held on private property. For more details, contact Thomas Watts, licensed auctioneer. News of the upcoming auction set Glendale Crest ablaze with gossip. Some residents were appalled, others found it hilarious. I received anonymous threats to vandalize my place if I went through with it. I also received supportive messages from neighbors who'd been penalized by the HOA for trivial reasons. Ms. Henderson tried to sabotage me by complaining to the county clerk, but the clerk responded that as long as the letter of the law was followed, I had every right to proceed. On the morning of the auction, a small crowd gathered in my yard. 2 cars, a compact sedan and a beat-up old SUV, were lined up, both looking somewhat neglected. I stood by a makeshift podium with a microphone, wearing my usual auction attire, a neat blazer, jeans, and polished boots. Miss Henderson lurked near the fence, arms crossed, lips pursed in disapproval. A couple of her board allies accompanied her, but a larger group of curious residents also showed up, some carrying coffee cups to watch the spectacle. I began with a brief explanation. These vehicles were left on my property without permission. The owners have been notified but failed to claim them within the legal time frame. I'm within my rights to auction them to recoup storage and towing costs. Ms. Henderson huffed loudly but said nothing. The bidding was modest, mostly people looking for a cheap used car, but after a few minutes, the sedan sold for $400. The SUV for $350. I collected the payments, handed over the keys, what keys I had, and promised the buyers a bill of sale. Ms. Henderson glowered from a distance, no doubt seething. Once the auction ended, a hush fell. Miss Henderson stepped forward, voice trembling with rage. "Thomas, you've taken this too far. You sold someone else's property. That's theft." I regarded her calmly. "It's not theft under the law. I gave them every chance to pick up the cars. They chose not to. This was a legal auction, Miss Henderson." She let out a bitter laugh. "We'll see what my attorney says. You might have won a small battle, but Glendale Crest stands by its right to host community events. This changes nothing." I stared at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "Oh, it changes a lot. Residents see how you abused your power. They see how you tried to cover up your mistake by blaming me. I'm not the villain here, you are. And the only reason I sold those cars is because you refused to do the right thing. Admit wrongdoing and handle the mess you caused." She opened her mouth, probably to spew more threats, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the cluster of neighbors watching, some with disapproving frowns aimed at her. Or maybe she realized she'd lost control of the narrative. She pivoted on her heel and stalked off, leaving me to gather my auction items. In the weeks that followed, Glendale Crest's board faced growing backlash. People started attending meetings in droves demanding reform. The local paper ran an opinion piece titled HOA Overreach or Neighborhood Necessity, which mostly criticized Ms. Henderson's actions. Some members of the board privately apologized to me, admitting they never approved the parking plan. They'd simply trusted Ms. Henderson's word. With mounting pressure, Ms. Henderson reluctantly stepped down from the presidency, replaced by a more level-headed neighbor named Sharon Liu, who promised transparency and better communication. A few months later, Glendale Crest held new board elections. Ms. Henderson tried to run again, but she was voted out by a landslide. People hadn't forgotten the fiasco of the 57 unauthorized cars. Meanwhile, I continued my auctioneer business, occasionally fielding jokes about car kidnappings. Some folks teased me about being the dreaded property enforcer, but mostly they admired my resolve. My father used to say, "If you don't stand up for what's yours, no one else will." That proved truer than ever in Glendale Crest. And the outcome? My property remains private, clearly marked with new signage. Glendale Crest is more cautious, refraining from any further trespasses. Ms. Henderson disappeared from the public eye. though I occasionally see her in the grocery store, scowling at me behind the produce aisle. I'd be lying if I said I don't feel a small thrill of satisfaction each time. Above all, the fiasco taught the community a valuable lesson about boundaries, respect, and the consequences of arrogance. When the HOA let 57 partygoers park on my land, they never suspected that the quiet guy next door was a feared auctioneer, fully capable of turning their vehicles into a profitable spectacle. They found out the hard way. I sold their cars, and I sold them legally. In a final twist of irony, the new HOA board invited me to speak at one of their first transparent meetings, wanting tips on how to handle property disputes without lawsuits or drama. I obliged, offering a few professional insights on liability, event planning, and neighborly courtesy. Let's just say I concluded my speech with, Rule number 1, always ask permission before you step on someone else's land. The crowd laughed. Miss Henderson, if she were there, stayed silent in the back. And that, my friends, is how Glendale Crest's most notorious birthday party ended, with a car auction, a dethroned HOA president, and a brand new respect for private property lines. Sometimes, you don't need fists or fancy lawyers, just a firm grasp of the law, a spine of steel, and a willingness to enforce boundaries when push comes to shove. My father would have been proud.